I always thought the vows for better or for worse meant we'd face the world together. I never realized the worst would be sitting at my own dining table, swirling a glass of Merlot, while my husband demanded I grovel to the woman actively trying to destroy our marriage. The house smelled like roasted garlic, rosemary, and impending disaster. I stood in the center of our newly renovated kitchen, staring at the digital clock on the oven. 6:45 p.m. They would be arriving in 15 minutes. By they, I meant my husband David, who was picking up his younger sister, Chloe, from the airport. To the outside world, David and I were the picture of suburban success. We were both in our early 30s. We had a beautiful four-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood in Connecticut. And we threw the kind of dinner parties that ended up on our friends' Instagram feeds. But behind the heavy oak front door, our marriage was suffocating under the weight of a third person. Chloe was 30 years old, chronically unemployed, and possessed a talent for weaponized incompetence that bordered on high art. From the moment I met David 5 years ago, Chloe had made it her life's mission to remind me that I was merely a guest in their family dynamic. When David and I got married, she showed up in a floor-length, champagne-colored gown that photographed pure white. When I confronted her, she cried, and David accused me of being a bridezilla who was bullying his fragile little sister. That was the pattern. Chloe would cross a boundary. I would react. She would play the victim. And David would ride in on his white horse to rescue her from my unreasonable expectations. For years, I swallowed my pride. I told myself that family was complicated. I told myself that David's fierce loyalty was a sign of a good heart. But that afternoon, my illusions had shattered completely. While prepping the lemon herb chicken for tonight's dinner, I needed to check our joint checking account to see if a payment to our contractor had cleared. David had left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I opened the banking app. The contractor's payment hadn't cleared. In fact, it couldn't clear. Our joint savings account, the one we had been fiercely contributing to for 3 years to fund our future children's education and an emergency safety net, was nearly empty. My heart had seized in my chest as I scrolled through the transaction history. Withdrawal, $5,000. Transfer, $8,500. Wire, $12,000. All of them were routed to a secondary account, an account I didn't recognize. Panic setting in, I had dug deeper, clicking through his saved documents and emails. It didn't take long to find the truth hidden in a folder nonchalantly labeled Tax Prep 2024. There were PDF receipts for rent payments on a luxury loft downtown. There were credit card statements paying off designer boutiques, spa weekends, and expensive dinners. All of it was under Chloe's name, paid for by David. Over the last 8 months, my husband had secretly siphoned over $45,000 of our money. I had worked 6 zero-hour weeks at my consulting firm to fund his sister's lavish lifestyle, all while she claimed she was struggling to find her footing and needed to stay in our guest room whenever she felt overwhelmed. I had sat on the kitchen stool for a full hour, the cold marble countertop pressing against my arms, crying until there was nothing left but a cold, hard rage. I didn't confront him over the phone. I didn't pack a bag. Instead, I printed the statements. I folded them neatly into a thick envelope, placed them in the drawer of the dining room hutch, and began to cook. If they wanted a family dinner, I was going to give them one they would never forget. At exactly 7 p.m., the front door swung open. David's booming laugh echoed in the foyer, followed by Chloe's high-pitched giggle. "Sarah, we're home!" David called out, as if nothing in the world was wrong. I wiped my hands on my apron, pasted on a smile that felt like cracked porcelain, and walked into the hallway. Chloe was standing there, dropping a matching set of Louis Vuitton luggage onto our hardwood floors. She was wearing a cashmere sweater I immediately recognized from the credit card statements it cost $800. "Sarah, darling," Chloe purred, stepping forward to give me a theatrical air kiss near my cheek. "It smells strong in here. Did you burn the garlic again? You know David has a sensitive stomach. It took every ounce of my willpower not to slap her right then." Instead, I looked at David. He was beaming at her, completely oblivious to the insult. "The chicken is just finishing up," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Let me take your coat, Chloe. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. "Oh, David can take it," she said, tossing her coat at him. "I'm exhausted. Do you have any of that expensive Pinot Noir? The one from Napa. I need to unwind." "Sure thing, Chloe," David said eagerly, already heading for the wine fridge. I watched them, a sudden wave of clarity washing over me. They weren't brother and sister. They were a codependent unit, and I was just the ATM funding their delusion. I walked back into the dining room, my eyes lingering on the hutch where the envelope rested. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The dining room table was set with our wedding china. The very plates Chloe had heavily implied were a bit pedestrian when we registered for them. The crystal wine glasses caught the low light of the chandelier, casting fragmented shadows across the linen tablecloth. David poured the wine, filling Chloe's glass to the brim before splashing a meager amount into mine. He sat at the head of the table, with Chloe to his right and me to his left. "So," David started, carving the chicken with a practiced motion, "Chloe has some exciting news." I took a slow sip of my wine, keeping my eyes fixed on her. "Oh? Did you finally find a job?" The air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Chloe's smug smile faltered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the stem of her wineglass. "Actually, Sarah," Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I've decided to start my own wellness brand. Corporate life is just so toxic to my aura. I need to be my own boss." David agrees. "Is that so?" I looked at my husband. "A wellness brand? How wonderful. And how exactly are you funding this aura-cleansing venture, Chloe? Startups are quite expensive." David cleared his throat, a faint flush creeping up his neck. He avoided my gaze, focusing entirely on a rogue piece of broccoli on his plate. "Well, you know, we're family. We support each other. I've agreed to help Chloe with some seed money. Just a small loan to get her off the ground." "A small loan," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Like the small loan for her rent downtown? Or the small loan for the cashmere sweater she's wearing?" Dead silence. The clinking of silverware stopped. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden, defensive anger. Chloe's mouth dropped open slightly, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she rearranged her features into a portrait of wounded innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Sarah," Chloe whispered, her eyes brimming with sudden, calculated tears. She looked at David. "David, what is she saying? Why is she attacking me the moment I walk in the door?" "Sarah, what the hell has gotten into you?" David demanded, his voice rising. "Are you snooping through my things again? My God, you are so paranoid and jealous of her. It's pathetic." "Jealous?" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Jealous of a 30-year-old leech who fakes panic attacks to get out of paying her own cell phone bill. No, David, I'm not jealous. I'm disgusted. I saw the accounts today. $45,000. Our savings. Gone." "It's my money too," David shouted, slamming his hand down on the table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. "I earn a paycheck. I have a right to help my family without asking for your permission like a child. It was our joint account, David. Money we saved for a house down payment, for a family. You stole from our future to fund her vacations." Chloe stood up, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted by a cold, barren woman who cares more about spreadsheets than family. No wonder David prefers spending time with me. At least I actually love him." The word barren hung in the air like poison gas. A year ago, I had suffered a devastating miscarriage at 19 weeks. It was a trauma that had nearly broken me. Chloe knew this. David knew this. I looked at my husband, expecting him to defend me, expecting him to finally draw the line. Instead, David stood up, his face twisted in fury, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That is enough," he roared. "You have disrespected my sister for the last time. You are completely unhinged. Say sorry to my sister right now, or leave my house." The words echoed off the dining room walls. "Say sorry to my sister, or leave my house." Time seemed to slow down. I looked at David, really looked at him. I saw the weak, cowardly man hiding behind a facade of patriarchal authority. I looked at Chloe, who was standing behind him, a triumphant, wicked smirk playing on her lips, wiping away fake tears. She had won. She had finally pushed him to kick me out. A strange, absolute calm descended over me. The tears I thought I would cry were gone, replaced by an icy, crystal-clear resolve. "Leave your house," I stated quietly. "You heard me," David sneered, crossing his arms, puffing his chest out. "Apologize to Chloe for calling her a leech, and apologize for going through my private financial matters. Now, or pack your bags." I didn't say a word. I simply stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress, my movements deliberate and slow. The silence in the room was deafening, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I walked slowly around the edge of the large oak table. My heels clicked rhythmically against the floorboards. Click, click, click. Chloe actually took a half step back as I approached, her triumphant smirk faltering just a bit as she saw the dead look in my eyes. She thought I was going to hit her. David tensed, ready to step between us, but I didn't stop in front of Chloe. I walked right past her. I stopped at the heavy antique hutch against the far wall. I opened the top drawer, the wood giving a soft groan, and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had prepared earlier. I turned back to them, holding the envelope, and walked back over to where David and Chloe stood. I stopped mere inches from my husband, looking up into his angry, confused eyes. "First of all," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a judge rendering a verdict, "I am not apologizing to the parasite who just mocked my dead child." Chloe gasped, a theatrical hand flying to her pearls. "And second of all," I turned my gaze back to David, raising the envelope and tapping it gently against his chest. "I think you seem to have forgotten a very minor, yet crucial, legal detail about our living situation." I tossed the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished oak and bumped into his plate of roasted chicken, spilling its contents. Bank statements fanned out. But on top of them was a thick, legally binding document adorned with a blue notary seal. David looked down at it, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" "That," I said, stepping back and folding my arms, "is the deed to this house." David picked it up, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. "You see, David," I continued, my voice ringing clear and authoritative through the dining room. "When we moved in here 3 years ago, your credit was in the gutter because you had co-signed a car loan for Chloe that she defaulted on. Do you remember?" David's face began to drain of color. "The bank wouldn't approve you for the mortgage," I said, savoring every single syllable. "So, I put down the entire 20% deposit from my inheritance. And the mortgage broker, my lawyer, and the title company all agreed it was safest to put the deed solely in my name." I took a step closer to him, leaning in so he could smell the faint scent of rosemary and absolute vindication. "You don't own a single brick of this house, David. You are a tenant. And as of this exact second, you and your sister are being evicted." David stood frozen, the heavy linen napkin slipping from his lap to the floor. He stared down at the crisp, notarized deed as if it were a venomous snake that had uncoiled on top of his roasted chicken. The blue seal of the state of Connecticut gleamed under the chandelier, confirming everything I had just said. "This," David stammered, his voice cracking, the booming authority from moments ago entirely evaporated. He picked up the document with shaking hands. "This is just a technicality, Sarah. We're married." It's marital property. You can't just. I suggest you call a real estate attorney before you embarrass yourself further. I cut in, my voice cold and steady, because the inheritance from my grandfather was kept in a separate, solitary trust. A trust that directly purchased this property. My lawyer, Richard Sterling, made very sure that your name wasn't anywhere near the equity, especially after you tanked your credit score bailing out your sister's leased BMW. Legally, you are a month-to-month tenant, and I am terminating your tenancy. Chloe, sensing her brother's sudden weakness, stepped forward, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. The wounded Doact vanished, replaced by the cornered rat I always knew she was. "You're bluffing, you psychotic bitch!" Chloe shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "You can't throw a husband out of his own home, and you certainly aren't taking my seed money. David promised me." "Your seed money?" I laughed, a harsh, scraping sound that echoed in the dining room. I walked over to the hutch and pulled out a secondary, thinner folder. I had been busy while the chicken roasted. "Let's talk about your wellness brand, Chloe. Luminous Aura, LLC, registered exactly 3 months ago. David is listed as the primary financial guarantor." I tossed a printed spreadsheet onto the table next to the deed. "As a senior consultant, I make my living analyzing business models. So, when I saw $45,000 missing, I did a little digging into where exactly that capital was deployed." David swallowed hard, his eyes darting between me and the spreadsheet. "Sarah, you don't understand the vision. We're sourcing premium, crystal-infused holistic oils. You are sourcing cheap, synthetic sludge," I interrupted, leaning over the table, pressing my weight onto my palms. I looked directly at Chloe, watching the color drain from her face. "You attempted to import 5 pallets of unvetted, unregistered cosmetic oils from an unverified supplier overseas. But because you have absolutely no concept of international trade or logistics, you didn't hire a bonded freight forwarder. You didn't secure the proper FDA clearance for cosmetic imports." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. I was relentless. "Right now, your precious inventory is sitting in a customs hold at the port of Newark," I stated, tapping the spreadsheet. "And because you didn't understand the logistics of warehousing, you are racking up hundreds of dollars a day in demurrage fees. You've been paying a premium for a climate-controlled commercial space you can't even put product into." I turned to David, who looked as though he might physically be sick. "Let me visualize your business metrics for you, David, since you clearly didn't run the numbers," I said, my tone dripping with professional disdain. "Your total revenue is exactly 0. Your landed costs have skyrocketed due to catastrophic supply chain mismanagement, penalties, and customs holds. And your profit margin? It's a crater of negative $45,000. It is a textbook logistical failure. You didn't invest in a startup. You lit our savings on fire in a shipping container in New Jersey." "David, don't listen to her," Chloe cried, tugging at his sleeve, her voice trembling with real panic now. "She's just trying to confuse us with corporate jargon. The supplier said the release paperwork is coming next week." "The supplier scammed you, Chloe," I said flatly. "I had my colleague, Nathan, run a quick background check on the commercial invoice you filed. The company doesn't exist. The address is a vacant lot in Shenzhen. They took your wire transfer, my wire transfer, and vanished." David dropped the deed. He stumbled backward, his back hitting the antique sideboard. "45,000, he whispered, his eyes glazed over. "The supplier is gone?" "Gone," I confirmed. "Along with your pride, your savings, and as of tonight, your marriage." "Sarah, please," David breathed, raising his hands in a placating gesture. The arrogant man who had ordered me to grovel to his sister was completely broken, replaced by a terrified boy. "Let's just sit down. Let's talk about this. We can fix the logistics. I'll get a second job." "I can. You can pack your bags," I commanded, pointing toward the foyer. "I am legally required to give you 30 days written notice for a formal eviction." Consider the papers I left on your pillow upstairs, your formal notice. However, if you or your sister are still inside these walls in 20 minutes, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing, and I will happily let my lawyer destroy you in front of a judge on Monday." Chloe began to hyperventilate, real, ugly, gasping sobs tearing from her throat. "Where are we supposed to go? It's raining! You're throwing family out onto the street. You can go to the luxury loft downtown." I smiled. A tight, merciless expression. The one with the exposed brick and the skylights. Rent is paid through the end of the month, courtesy of my hard work. Now, get out. They left 19 minutes later. Watching David drag Chloe's matching Louis Vuitton luggage through the front door and out into the torrential spring rain was a cinematic experience. Chloe was wailing, her mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her $800 cashmere sweater. David didn't look back. His shoulders were slumped. His head bowed against the wind as he loaded the bags into his car. When the taillights disappeared down the driveway, I locked the heavy oak door. I didn't cry. I walked into the kitchen, poured the remaining expensive Napa Pinot Noir down the stainless steel sink, and went to sleep in my own house. The next morning, the real war began. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates. Richard Sterling, a ruthless family law attorney who had been my grandfather's closest friend, sat across from me, reviewing the bank statements and the LLC filings I had provided. "You were thorough, Sarah," Richard murmured, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up, his sharp blue eyes gleaming with predatory legal intent. The commingling of joint assets to fund a hidden liability is a textbook breach of fiduciary duty within a marriage. But it's worse than just the $45,000. My stomach tightened. Worse how? Richard flipped to the last page of the LLC registration I had pulled. David didn't just provide seed money. He signed a personal guarantee on the commercial lease for that climate-controlled warehouse Chloe rented. When Not If This Wellness brand defaults on that lease, the landlord will come after David personally for the remainder of the contract. I leaned back in the plush leather chair, rubbing my temples. "How much, Richard?" "It's a 2-year commercial lease at $5,000 a month," Richard stated plainly. "He's on the hook for $120,000. Since we have documented proof that these funds were hidden from you and used for an LLC you have zero ownership in, I can easily petition the court to shield your assets from his debt." "But David? He is financially underwater." "Good," I said, the word tasting like cold steel on my tongue. "Freeze the remaining joint accounts immediately. Cut off the credit cards. Transfer my direct deposits to my private account. Leave him with exactly what he earned." David was a mid-level manager at a regional paper supplier. He made a decent salary, but he lived well beyond his means, entirely subsidized by my consulting income and careful financial planning. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone exploded. First came the angry texts from David, full of bravado, threatening to sue me for his half of the house. I forwarded them to Richard, who responded with a single, terrifyingly worded cease and desist letter outlining David's impending commercial debt and his legal standing. The angry texts stopped. Then came the panicked voicemails. David had gone to pay for Chloe's groceries and his card was declined. He had checked the joint account to find it frozen pending mediation. He realized, very suddenly, that without my income, he couldn't afford his car payment, Chloe's loft, and the impending warehouse lease. The most satisfying moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a Zoom meeting, breaking down Q3 logistics forecasting for a client, when a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from Nathan, my colleague. Subject: Luminous Aura, LLC, update. Message: "Hey Sarah, just saw the Port Authority public logs. Customs finally seized and destroyed that entire shipment in Newark. Hazardous materials violation. They slapped the importer of record, Dave, with a $15,000 disposal fine." I smiled at my webcam. flawlessly continuing my presentation on supply chain efficiency. David had wanted to play businessman to impress his sister. Now he was getting the full corporate experience. On day 28 of their 30-day eviction notice, the doorbell rang at 9 p.m. I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. It was David. He was alone. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suits. He was in a rumpled hoodie, looking 10 years older, the heavy bags under his eyes visible even through the grainy night vision lens. I walked to the foyer and opened the door, leaving the heavy chain engaged. I peered out at him through the narrow gap. "What do you want, David?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice hollow. "Please, just open the door. I need to talk to you. I have nowhere else to go." "I find that hard to believe," I replied. "You have a luxury loft downtown. You have your family. You have a burgeoning wellness empire." He let out a broken, pathetic sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Chloe locked me out." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" The money ran out," David confessed, staring at his wet shoes. "The landlord for the warehouse served me with a lawsuit for breaking the lease. The customs people fined me. I went to the loft to tell Chloe we needed to sell her car to cover the lawyer fees. She had changed the locks." I stared at him, the sheer poetic justice of it all almost too perfect to believe. "She told me I was useless to her if I couldn't provide capital," David continued, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "She said I ruined her dream. I checked her Instagram an hour ago. She's in Miami. She found some guy in a club who promised to fund a new crypto startup. She blocked my number, Sarah, my own sister." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, begging for the woman who had spent 5 years cleaning up his messes, managing his life, and absorbing his family's abuse. "I was so stupid," he whispered, pressing his hand against the wet wood of the door. "I see it now. I see how she used me. I lost the only good thing in my life for someone who didn't even care about me. Please, Sarah, let me come home. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. I love you." I looked at the man I had once promised forever to. I looked at the rain dripping from the porch roof, washing away the dirt on the steps. "David," I said softly. He perked up, a spark of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. "Yes? Yes? Sarah, your 30 days are up on Thursday," I told him. "If you leave any of your remaining boxes in the garage past 5 p.m., I am having a junk removal service. Throw them in the city dump." The hope in his eyes shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated devastation. "Goodbye, David," I said. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt into place with a definitive click, and turned off the porch light, leaving him standing alone in the dark. 6 months later, the Hartford County Family Court felt like a meat locker. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, chilling the mahogany tables and the sterile linoleum floors. David sat across the aisle from me. He was practically unrecognizable. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting grey suit that hung off his suddenly gaunt frame. The confident, booming arrogance that had once filled my dining room was entirely gone. Next to him sat his court-appointed attorney, a nervous, sweating man named Arthur Pendleton, who kept shuffling the same 3 pieces of paper. My lawyer, Richard Sterling, sat beside me like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He didn't shuffle papers. He simply watched David with a look of predatory amusement. Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense woman with sharp silver hair and severe spectacles, flipped to the final page of our settlement agreement. Because of the irrefutable paper trail, proving David's financial infidelity funneling marital assets into a fraudulent shell company, the judge had shown zero leniency during the proceedings. "Mr. Gallagher," Judge Harrison's voice cracked through the quiet courtroom like a whip. "You secretly redirected $45,000 of joint savings, then signed a commercial lease guaranteeing over $100,000 in debt without your spouse's knowledge or consent. You attempted to defraud your own marriage to play venture capitalist for an LLC that failed to clear basic customs protocols. David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. The court grants the divorce, Judge Harrison finalized, banging her gavel. The petitioner, Sarah, retains sole ownership of the primary residence as legally deeded. The respondent, David, will assume sole and complete responsibility for all liabilities associated with Luminous Aura LLC, including the commercial lease breach and the federal disposal penalties. We are adjourned. It was over. David was financially ruined. Without my income to mask his poor decisions, bankruptcy was his only viable option, meaning his credit would be destroyed for the next decade. He couldn't even rent a decent apartment. I had heard through mutual friends that he was currently sleeping on a lumpy futon in his co-worker's damp basement. While David's life collapsed into a chaotic spreadsheet of red ink, mine soared. Free from the emotional and financial drain of supporting two dependent adults, I threw myself entirely into my consulting firm. The clarity I found after kicking them out translated directly into my performance. 2 months post-separation, my firm handed me our most complex account yet, a massive logistical overhaul for a multinational retailer struggling with crippling supply chain bottlenecks. I dove into the data, building comprehensive visualization models to track their revenue, landed costs, and shrinking profit margins. I completely restructured their international trade operation, bypassing their failing European transit points. Instead, I established a streamlined, highly profitable, direct logistics network. Straight out of their primary manufacturing hubs in Vietnam, the new trade route cut their transit times in half and saved the client millions in demurrage fees. The victory was massive. 2 weeks after the divorce was legally finalized, my boss, an intimidating senior partner named Margaret, called me into her corner office and offered me a full partnership at the firm. To celebrate my promotion, I took Margaret and 2 junior executives out for a celebratory lunch at a bustling, upscale bistro downtown. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon. We were seated at a prime corner booth, laughing, drinking sparkling water, and discussing the success of the new Southeast Asian trade routes. "I'll have your server right over to take your drink orders," the smartly dressed hostess told us with a warm smile. A moment later, a waitress in a slightly stained black apron approached our table, holding a heavy plastic pitcher of ice water. "Good afternoon, my name is." The voice stopped dead. I looked up from my leather-bound menu. Standing there, her hair pulled back into a messy, state-mandated ponytail, holding the water pitcher with trembling hands, was Chloe. The $800 cashmere sweaters were gone. The Louis Vuitton luggage was a distant memory. The Miami crypto investor she had run off with had turned out to be a serial grifter named Kevin. He had convinced her to transfer the last of her stolen funds into a fake wallet, emptied her accounts, and left her stranded in a Florida motel. With no education, no real-world skills, and her brother completely broke, Chloe had been forced to crawl back to Connecticut. She had to take the very first job that would hire her just to survive. She stared at me, her face draining of all color until it matched the stark white of her uniform shirt. The smug, condescending arrogance that had defined her entire existence was completely extinguished. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth, pleasant, and utterly devoid of pity. "It's been a while. How is the wellness brand coming along?" Margaret looked between us, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, sensing the sudden, heavy tension. "You know each other, Sarah? Just an old acquaintance." I smiled, keeping my eyes locked on the terrified woman standing beside our booth. She used to have a very strong aversion to corporate life. I see she's found a more hands-on career instead. Chloe's jaw tightened. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, the familiar, manipulative weapon she used to wield to get her way, to make herself the victim. But there was no David here to save her. There was no one to manipulate. There was only the harsh, undeniable reality of the life she had earned for herself. Chloe choked on her words, a single tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. I'll get my manager. I'll ask him to reassign this table. No need, I said coolly, leaning back against the plush leather of the booth. We are quite comfortable. I'll take a sparkling water with a twist of lemon, please. And let's make sure the glass is clean this time. Chloe stood frozen for a second, the humiliation radiating off her in visible waves. But then, defeated by the crushing weight of her own karma, she lowered her head. She poured my water with shaking hands, the ice clinking loudly in the silent space between us, and walked away to fetch our drinks. She was a waitress, forced to serve the woman she had once called barren and useless. That evening, I drove home to my quiet, beautiful house. The house I owned entirely. I walked into my pristine kitchen, the setting of so much past misery, and felt nothing but absolute, perfect peace. I poured a glass of crisp white wine and began to cook. I prepared a complex, spicy chicken dish, the air filling with the rich, vibrant aromas of roasted chili, garlic, and wild lime leaves. There was no one to complain about the smell. There was no one to demand an apology. There was only me, the architect of my own rescue, savoring the sweet, undeniable taste of justice. Some people believe marriage is about blind loyalty, even when you're being led off a cliff. But true empowerment comes from knowing your worth and having the receipts to prove it. I didn't just survive the betrayal of a narcissistic husband and his parasitic sister. I audited them out of my life entirely. Now, my home is truly mine. My future is completely secure. And the silence is absolutely beautiful.